This is Low Light Trivia. Old World. 51 questions. There's no timer and nothing to keep up with. Each question gets a pause, then the answer, then a little more about it. If you fall asleep before the end, that's the idea. If you'd like more of these, subscribing helps. That's the last thing I'll ask of you tonight. Let's begin. What was the function of the coulter, a vertical blade fixed to the pole in front of the ploughshare? A. Guiding the direction of the oxen. B. Throwing loosened soil to either side. C. Cutting through roots in the way of the share. D. Holding the pole and tail together. The answer is cutting through roots in the way of the share. The coulter worked ahead of the main share, slicing downward through roots and tough ground so that the share itself could more easily turn over the loosened soil. This division of labour between two blades made ploughing more efficient, especially in land that had not been recently cleared or cultivated. Why were certain ancient Egyptian coffins from Thebes referred to as yellow coffins? A. Their varnish naturally faded to a yellow hue over centuries. B. They were carved only from yellow-toned acacia wood. C. They were reserved exclusively for temple priests. D. Their background color was meant to imitate gold. The answer is, their background color was meant to imitate gold. Gold symbolized the imperishable flesh of the gods in Egyptian belief, so painting a coffin's background to resemble it linked the deceased to divine regeneration. Craftsmen achieved this glowing effect using costly imported orpiment or more affordable yellow ochre, sometimes blending the two, before finishing the surface with a glossy resin varnish to enhance its brilliance. In the negative confession recited by the deceased during judgment before the gods, which spell of the Book of the Dead lists the sins the person claims not to have committed? A. Spell 6. B. Spell 17. C. Spell 125. D. Spell 30. The answer is spell 125. The negative confession was a moral checklist recited at the weighing of the heart, where the deceased declared innocence of wrongdoing such as killing, causing grief, or defying the king. This litany shows how deeply personal ethics were bound to maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order, since even private behavior was thought to affect the stability of the universe. How many rows and columns appear on the ancient Babylonian clay tablet now known as Plimpton 322? A. 20 rows and 6 columns. B. 15 rows and 4 columns. C. 12 rows and 5 columns. D. 10 rows and 3 columns. The answer is 15 rows and 4 columns. The tablet, scribed sometime between 1900 and 1600 years before the Common Era, lays out its sexagesimal numbers in a neat grid. The last column simply numbers the rows 1 through 15, while the second and third columns are labeled with words meaning roughly width and diagonal, hinting that the whole table concerns right triangles. To which deity were the ancient Sumerian farming instructions ultimately attributed? A. Ninurta. B. Enlil. C. Enki. D. Utu. The answer is Ninurta. The instructions close by crediting Ninurta, described as the son of Enlil and a faithful farmer himself, tying agricultural wisdom directly to divine authority. This framing reflects how Mesopotamian societies often presented practical knowledge, like farming techniques, as sacred teachings passed down from the gods. What did a lavish Roman emperor sprinkle on fish and truffles in place of pepper? A. Saffron threads. B. Gold dust. C. Pearls. D. Ground amber. The answer is pearls. This emperor reportedly sprinkled pearls onto fish and truffles instead of ordinary pepper, a striking example of substituting precious materials for common seasonings. Similar excesses included serving peas with gold pieces and lentils with onyx, all meant to illustrate how thoroughly he replaced everyday necessities with costly luxuries at his table. Which two institutions carried out 10 years of archaeological excavations at the ancient Mesopotamian site of Kish? A. The Field Museum and the University of Pennsylvania. B. The British Museum and the University of Cambridge. C. The Chicago Field Museum and the University of Oxford. D. The Iraq Museum and the University of Chicago. The answer is the Chicago Field Museum and the University of Oxford. Kish, a major Mesopotamian city on the Euphrates floodplain, was excavated jointly by these two institutions over a full decade in the early 20th century. Their partnership was typical of the era, when foreign museums and universities often combined resources and expertise to fund and staff large-scale digs in Iraq, later dividing the recovered artifacts between the sponsoring bodies and the host country's museum. After which year do Egyptian chronological dates become considered certain? A. 332 BC. B. 1069 BC. C. 2525 BC. D. 664 BC. The answer is 664 BC. Before 664 BC, the exact placement of Egyptian dynasties and events relies on reconstructed king lists and astronomical estimates, making earlier dates approximate. After this point, historical records, including Greek sources and more precise Egyptian documentation, allow historians to fix dates with much greater confidence. Which publishing house released The Comic History of Rome in 1851? A. Chapman and Hall. B. John Murray. C. Bradbury and Evans. D. Smith, Elder and Co. The answer is Bradbury and Evans. Bradbury and Evans was a prominent Victorian publishing firm known for producing humorous and illustrated works, and its involvement here placed The Comic History of Rome alongside other popular comic literature of the period, reflecting the era's appetite for blending education with entertainment. In what year was the satirical London magazine Punch first published? A. 1852. B. 1838. C. 1845. D. 1841. The answer is 1841. Masses. Punch became a fixture of Victorian print culture, known for mocking politicians and social types alike. Two of its staff, Gilbert Abbott à Becket and John Leach, later took that same mocking sensibility and applied it to ancient history, producing comic histories of England and Rome that layered Victorian manners onto togas and helmets. In the myth central to Egyptian kingship, who was said to have murdered Osiris, the first king of Egypt? A. Anubis. B. Horus. C. Seth. D. Thoth. The answer is Seth. The myth held that Osiris, Egypt's first king, was killed by his own brother Seth, and that his son Horus later avenged him. This story was more than a tale. It linked each living king to Horus and each dead king to Osiris, giving every reign a mythic continuity stretching back to the gods themselves. The word for the mythical maze at Knossos comes from an ancient Minoan term meaning what? A. Sun Temple. B. Double Axe. C. Sacred Bull. D. King's Court. The answer is double axe. The word labyrinth traces back to the Minoan term labris, meaning double axe, a symbol carved widely throughout the palace at Knossos. This connects the famous myth of the maze and the Minotaur to a real architectural and religious symbol used by the Minoans, rather than being a purely poetic invention describing the palace's confusing floor plan of interconnected rooms. Which language is recognized as the first identifiable written language, later adapted for Akkadian, Assyrian, and Babylonian? A. Elamite. B. Akkadian. C. Sumerian. D. Aramaic. The answer is Sumerian. Sumerian stands apart because it has no known relatives among modern languages, ancient or otherwise. Cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script first used to write it, was later borrowed and reshaped to record Akkadian by around 2400 years before the Common Era, and eventually served Assyrian and Babylonian scribes as well, spreading a single writing system across many unrelated tongues. According to a member of the Iraqi parliament involved in the province proposal, roughly what share of the Nineveh Plains population was Assyrian, Syriac, or Chaldean? A. Almost 40%. B. About 20%. C. Roughly 10%. D. Nearly 60%. The answer is almost 40%. When asked directly about the demographic makeup of the region proposed for a new province, the Iraqi official overseeing the plan gave this estimate, while noting that the exact figure would shift depending on which districts were ultimately included within the province's borders. Which ancient Egyptian religious complex is described as one of the largest temple complexes in the world? A. Abu Simbel. B. Karnak. C. Dendera. D. Philae. The answer is Karnak. Karnak, located near modern Luxor, grew over many centuries into a vast religious complex containing numerous temples, chapels, and processional avenues dedicated mainly to the god Amun-Ra. Its scale and long history of continuous building by successive pharaohs make it one of the most architecturally rich and expansive sacred sites to survive from the ancient world. According to Aristoxenus, how old was Pythagoras when he left Samos for Italy to escape the growing tyranny of Polycrates? A. 50 years old. B. 40 years old. C. 60 years old. D. 30 years old. The answer is 40 years old. Pythagoras had built a school and a private cave for study and discussion near Samos, but as Polycrates' rule grew harsher, he judged it wiser to leave for Italy rather than risk becoming a victim of tyranny himself. Aristoxenus, an ancient biographer, recorded his age at that departure as 40. At approximately what age did the young pharaoh Tutankhamun die? A. 18 years. B. 30 years. C. 25 years. D. 12 years. The answer is 18 years. Tutankhamun, the final ruler of Egypt's 18th dynasty, died suddenly and young, a fact that has fueled centuries of speculation about the cause of his death. Radiological studies of his skull were later used to argue for foul play, though a careful re-examination found the supposed evidence of a blow to the head could be explained instead by ordinary mummification practices and later handling. On the ancient bronze flesh hook found in a bog at Dunaverny, what pairs of birds are shown among its ornaments? A. A pair of falcons and a pair of doves with their fledglings. B. A pair of eagles and a pair of herons with their chicks. C. A pair of owls and a pair of geese with their goslings. D. A pair of corvids, perhaps ravens, and a pair of swans with their cygnets. The answer is a pair of corvids, perhaps ravens, and a pair of swans with their cygnets. The long-handled bronze and oak flesh hook was decorated with bird figures rather than purely abstract patterns, suggesting the birds held symbolic meaning in feasting rituals of the late Bronze Age. Corvids and swans were both familiar wetland and woodland birds to the people who crafted and used this ceremonial object. In discussions of ancient Egyptian coffin fabrication, which English term is reserved only for a coffin made entirely of stone? A. Sarcophagus. B. Cartonnage. C. Kersu. D. Rishi coffin. The answer is sarcophagus. Although people often use the word loosely, specialists reserve it strictly for stone examples, distinguishing it from wooden or cartonnage coffins. This precision matters because coffin materials changed over time with fashion, resource availability, and religious practice, so keeping terms exact helps researchers track those long-term shifts in craftsmanship and belief without confusing one material for another. According to Encyclopedia Iranica, in how many days was the fortress of Alexandria, Eshate on the Jaxartes built? A. 30 days. B. 20 days. C. 40 days. D. 10 days. The answer is 20 days. Alexandria Eshate, meaning Alexandria the Farthest, served as a fortified outpost against nomadic peoples beyond the Jaxartes River. Its rapid construction reflects the military urgency of securing the empire's northeastern frontier. The site was later rebuilt under the name Antioch and is now located near Leninabad, illustrating how these frontier cities often changed names under later Hellenistic rulers. Bone flutes, some of the earliest known musical instruments, appear in the archaeological records starting from about how long ago? A. 40,000 years ago. B. 10,000 years ago. C. 100,000 years ago. D. 5,000 years ago. The answer is 40,000 years ago. Music making stretches back far earlier than farming, writing, or cities. Simple flutes carved from bone show that humans were creating and enjoying music tens of thousands of years before the rise of the earliest civilizations. This suggests that the desire to make sound for pleasure, rather than pure survival, is an ancient and deeply rooted part of being human. The Mesopotamian marshes primarily lie on the floodplains of which two rivers? A. The Nile and Jordan. B. The Euphrates and Tigris. C. The Karun and Shat al-Arab. D. The Diyala and Euphrates. The answer is the Euphrates and Tigris. The marshes formed where these two great Mesopotamian rivers spread across low-lying floodplains in southern Iraq, creating a mosaic of reed beds and open water. This floodplain setting historically made the region the largest wetland ecosystem in Western Eurasia, supporting the marsh people's way of life built around fishing, reed harvesting, and water buffalo herding. What kind of legal organization is the Alpheos project registered as in the United States? A. A privately held software company. B. A 501c3 non-profit organization. C. A publicly traded corporation. D. A federally funded research laboratory. The answer is a 501c3 non-profit organization. Organizations with this tax-exempt status in the United States are typically formed for charitable, educational, or similar public benefit purposes, rather than to generate profit for owners or shareholders. This structure fits a project built around free, open-source tools meant to help learners read classical languages like Latin and Greek in their original form. According to reconstructions combining scientific and historical evidence, what kind of climate accompanied the rise of the Roman Empire? A. A prolonged empire-wide drought. B. Stable and favorable conditions. C. Rapidly cooling temperatures. D. Erratic monsoon rains. The answer is stable and favorable conditions. Multi-proxy natural archives combined with written records show that Rome's expansion coincided with a long stretch of dependable climate, which only broke down centuries later. This favorable backdrop helped support the agricultural surplus that fed Rome's growing population and armies, before deteriorating sharply during the empire's 3rd century crisis. Where was the Dunaverny flesh hook discovered, according to the British Museum's collection record? A. In the bog of Dunaverny. B. In a burial mound near Little Thetford. C. In a riverbed in Ulster. D. In a cave near Stonehenge. The answer is in the bog of Dunaverny. The acquisition notes record a bog find spot, a common preservation context for Bronze Age metal and organic objects since waterlogged, low-oxygen conditions slow decay. This is why the oak shaft fragments of the flesh hook survived alongside the bronze fittings, allowing later radiocarbon dating of the wood itself. In what year was the elaborate bronze flesh hook discovered in the bog of Dunaverney? A. 1904. B. 1977. C. 1856. D. 1829. The answer is 1829. The flesh hook lay preserved in a bog for centuries before its recovery, with peat bogs often protecting organic materials like the oak shaft fragments alongside the bronze fittings. It was later acquired by a museum decades after being found, showing how long some artifacts wait between discovery and public display. Which Roman currency displaced the ancient Greek drachma after the Roman conquest of Greece? A. The denarius. B. The sestertius. C. The aureus. D. The shekel. The answer is the denarius. After the Roman conquest of Greece, in a year corresponding to 146 BC, the Roman denarius took over as the dominant currency, and the drachma faded so quietly that its disappearance went largely unrecorded at the time. The drachma would not return until Greece became an independent kingdom many centuries later. One of the year names used by King Ibalpiel II commemorated the death of which ruler? A. Zimri Lim. B. Yadun Lim. C. Samsi Adu. D. Hammurabi. The answer is Samsi Adu. Mesopotamian year names often marked major political turning points rather than routine events. Samsi Adu had been a powerful Amorite overlord controlling much of Upper Mesopotamia, so his death was significant enough to be chosen as the defining event for naming an entire year in Ibal-Pl's reign, showing how such names doubled as historical records. For radiocarbon dating the Dunaverney flesh hook, samples were taken from which material? A. Quercus spe, oak. B. Bronze ferrules. C. Bog peat surrounding the object. D. Copper alloy strips. The answer is Quercus span, oak. Because metal cannot be radiocarbon dated, researchers dated the surviving oak shaft fragments instead, using two separate samples that produced closely matching results. This method allows organic components of composite artifacts to anchor a date range for objects that combine both metal and wood. Who coined the term hilly flanks in 1948? A. Kathleen Kenyon. B. V. Gordon Childe. C. Gordon Willey. D. Robert Braidwood. The answer is Robert Braidwood. Robert Braidwood introduced the concept of the hilly flanks to explain why agriculture began where it did. He argued that natural rainfall, combined with the presence of wild ancestors of domesticated crops and animals, made these upland regions ideal for early farming without needing irrigation systems like those later used in Mesopotamia. How far is Failaka Island from Kuwait City? A. 10 kilometers. B. 50 kilometers. C. 20 kilometers. D. 100 kilometers. The answer is 20 kilometers. Failaka's location just off the coast made it a convenient stopping point along Gulf trade routes linking Mesopotamia to the south. Its nearness to the mainland, combined with its own harbours and fresh water, helped it become a hub for exchange between distant civilizations rather than an isolated outpost. According to ancient Sumerian ploughing instructions, how many furrows should be made per nindan of field width? A. 12 furrows. B. 8 furrows. C. 2 furrows. D. 4 furrows. The answer is 8 furrows. Closely spaced furrows were recommended because the barley would lodge or settle firmly into tighter rows. This spacing guidance shows how carefully Sumerian farmers calculated planting density, balancing seed placement with the width of the field to maximize a healthy, well-rooted crop. What two materials make up the surviving Dunaverny flesh hook and its shaft fragment? A. Copper alloy and oak. B. Bronze and yew wood. C. Iron and ash wood. D. Silver and elm wood. The answer is copper alloy and oak. The hook itself was cast in copper alloy, while its long handle was originally made from sections of oak wood joined by bronze ferrules. A surviving fragment of that oak shaft even carries inlaid copper alloy strips arranged in a herringbone pattern, showing the careful craftsmanship applied to even the wooden parts of the object. What name did Alexander the Great order to be given to the island now called Failaka? A. Meluha. B. Agarum. C. Tylos. D. Ikaros. The answer is Icaros. Alexander's scouts reported 2 islands off the Arabian shore of the Gulf. He named the nearer one Icaros and the more distant one Tylos, which is now Bahrain. Icaros was remembered for its rich vegetation and wildlife, and it later served as a harbour for the Seleucid kingdom after Alexander's death. Which archaeologist discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings in November 1922? A. Victor Loret. B. Kent Weeks. C. Howard Carter. D. Edward Ayrton. The answer is Howard Carter. Howard Carter's find of the largely intact 18th dynasty tomb brought instant worldwide fame to the young pharaoh. Though small compared with other royal tombs in the valley, it survived with its funerary treasures remarkably undisturbed, which is why its wall paintings and contents later became the focus of long-term conservation efforts to protect them from heavy visitor traffic. In ancient Greek farming advice, why was a farmer told to keep 2 ploughs on hand rather than just one? A. So that 2 oxen could pull them side by side. B. So that one could be used for stony soil and one for sandy soil. C. So that one could be lent to a neighbour each season. D. So that if one broke, the other might be ready for use. The answer is, so that if one broke, the other might be ready for use. This practical advice, attributed to Hesiod, reflects the reality of farming with wooden tools that were prone to snapping under strain. Keeping a spare plough meant a farmer would not lose valuable working days waiting for repairs, since ploughing had to follow the seasons closely to ensure a successful sowing and harvest. By the early 2000s, what portion of the wetlands that once covered the Mesopotamian marshlands had been lost to damming, diversion of river water, and draining? A. 85%. B. 65%. C. 95%. D. 50%. The answer is 85%. The Al-Hawiza marshes, once part of roughly 20,000 square kilometers of wetland shared by Iraq and Iran, lost the vast majority of their area within about a decade as the Tigris and Euphrates were dammed and diverted, and wetlands were deliberately drained, turning a thriving ecosystem into a shadow of its former extent. What did a Roman emperor famous for his excesses feed to his dogs? A. Nightingale tongues. B. Flamingo brains. C. Peacock tongues. D. Goose livers. The answer is goose livers. Among the many extravagances recorded of this emperor was his practice of feeding his dogs on goose livers, a luxury food for humans repurposed as pet food. Such details were recorded to illustrate a ruler's reckless disregard for expense, contrasting sharply with the frugality expected of Roman leaders and used by ancient biographers to condemn his character. According to the Getty publication House of Eternity, which Italian explorer discovered the tomb of Nefertari in 1904? A. Howard Carter. B. Ernesto Schiaparelli. C. Kent Weeks. D. Victor Loret. The answer is Ernesto Schiaparelli. The tomb of Nefertari, favorite queen of Ramesses II, is celebrated for its exceptionally detailed wall paintings in the Valley of the Queens. By the time conservators began emergency work in 1986, decades after its discovery, the paintings had deteriorated severely, prompting a 6-year joint conservation project between the Getty Conservation Institute and Egyptian antiquities authorities. In September of 1981, armed looters stole carved jade objects from a site museum at which ancient Maya city? A. Chichen Itza. B. Tikal. C. Copan. D. Palenque. The answer is Tikal. The stolen jades were not unknown or undocumented pieces. They had been carefully excavated and recorded by researchers working at the site for over a decade before the theft, which is why their loss was especially painful to the scholarly community. Even well-studied museum collections remain vulnerable to armed theft, showing that looting threatens not just buried sites, but also objects already excavated and on display. What fear did young Alexander notice in the horse Bucephalus that allowed him to tame the animal? A. Fear of his own shadow. B. Fear of open water. C. Fear of fire. D. Fear of loud noises. The answer is fear of his own shadow. While grown men struggled to control the powerful horse through force, young Alexander watched carefully and noticed something subtle. The horse kept flinching at the sight of its own moving shadow on the ground. By simply turning the animal to face the sun so the shadow fell behind it, Alexander calmed the horse enough to mount it, a moment historians later saw as revealing his instinct for careful observation over brute strength. According to tradition, in what year was the city of Rome founded beside the river Tiber? A. 621 BC. B. 476 BC. C. 808 BC. D. 753 BC. The answer is 753 BC. This traditional founding date marks the start of the Roman kingdom, which lasted until the establishment of the Republic, While the exact founding is legendary rather than historically verified, ancient Romans themselves used this date as the basis for their own calendar system, counting years from the city's founding, known as ab urbe condita. On the Iranian Central Plateau, what kind of subsistence lifestyle did Mesolithic communities maintain, based on plant and animal remains? A. A mixed economy of foraging and cereal cultivation. B. A purely foraging lifestyle. C. A fully domesticated farming economy. D. Nomadic pastoralism with domesticated sheep. The answer is A. Purely foraging lifestyle. Studies of plant and animal remains from the Iranian Central Plateau show that during the Mesolithic period, people relied entirely on hunting and gathering. This changed sharply in the following early Neolithic period, when communities there were using fully domesticated plants and animals, suggesting farming knowledge arrived from elsewhere rather than developing locally. What object did investigators find left behind at an illegal dig pit uncovered at a national battlefield park? A. A metal detector. B. A shovel. C. A GPS receiver. D. A compass. The answer is a compass. When rangers investigate suspected looting, they document the scene carefully before removing anything, since the surrounding soil and objects can reveal how a site was disturbed. At one battlefield park, investigators found a dig pit surrounded by tools used to record the violation for prosecution, including a compass, a measuring ruler, and string, rather than any artifacts, which had already been taken. Which site holds the distinction of being the only city-sized Neolithic settlement on the island of Crete? A. Zakros. B. Phaistos. C. Knossos. D. Malia. The answer is Knossos. Long before its famous Bronze Age palace was built, Knossos had already grown into a settlement large enough to be considered a true city during the Neolithic period, unlike other Cretan sites of that era. Layers of ancient material lie many meters beneath the later palace ruins, showing just how long people had been living and building on that same hill. One historian's provocative explanation for mass conversions to Christianity in the Roman world emphasized which two factors above simple growing piety? A. Tax exemption and military promotion. B. Forced conversion and confiscation of pagan temples. C. Organized philosophical debate and civic pressure. D. The appeal of miracle and the chance for worldly advantage. The answer is the appeal of miracle and the chance for worldly advantage. Rather than picturing converts as moved primarily by deepening faith, This account suggests many were drawn by dramatic reports of miracles or by practical benefits that came with joining the growing church. This secular, rather than devotional explanation offers a different lens on how a minority faith became dominant across the Roman Empire over several centuries. According to ancient sources, in which region were small wheels first added to the plough around the time of Pliny? A. Raetia. B. Mysia. C. Elis. D. Mantua. The answer is Raetia. Wheels were a later refinement to the plough, added long after the basic share beam, tail, and pole design had been established. Their introduction in Raetia, a region north of Italy, shows how plough technology continued to evolve gradually across the Roman world, eventually influencing designs used elsewhere, including near Mantua and Venice. During which span of time was the Korean peninsula divided into three rival kingdoms, according to museum records of the period? A. From the 4th century BCE until the 2nd century CE. B. From the 10th century BCE until the 3rd century CE. C. From the 3rd century CE until the 10th century CE. D. From the 1st century BCE until the 7th century CE. The answer is from the 1st century BCE until the 7th century CE. For roughly 700 years, the peninsula was shared by three competing states: Goguryeo, Paikche, and Silla, each developing its own artistic and political traditions before eventual unification. This division shaped much of early Korean history, including distinct burial customs and artworks that archaeologists still use to distinguish the kingdoms from one another today. What did surviving Egyptian accounts and contracts show about pay for women doing the same job as men? A. Women were paid only in food, never in goods. B. Women were legally barred from earning wages. C. Women received the same pay rations as men. D. Women received half the pay of men. The answer is women received the same pay rations as men. Financial records from ancient Egypt reveal that women doing identical work to men were compensated equally, a striking degree of economic parity for the ancient world. This equal pay, combined with women's rights to own property, make wills and choose heirs, reflects a broader pattern of female financial independence, rarely matched elsewhere in antiquity. Ottoman sultans and male dignitaries wore kaftans right up until the dissolution of the Ottoman government in which year? A. 1918. B. 1894. C. 1910. D. 1922. The answer is 1922. Kaftans in the Ottoman Empire were not just clothing but a marker of rank, with rich colours and ornate details signalling status among sultans and generals. This tradition of formal, coat-like kaftans continued for centuries, only ending when the Ottoman government itself came to an end in the early 1920s. Which early poet did ancient geographers, including the scholar Hipparchus, regard as the true founder of geographical science? A. Homer. B. Herodotus. C. Hesiod. D. Thucydides. The answer is Homer. Long before geography existed as a formal discipline, scholars looked back to epic poetry for its earliest attempts to describe the world. Homer's verses about distant peoples, unfamiliar lands, and the ocean believed to encircle the earth were taken seriously enough that later geographers treated his poetry as a genuine starting point for mapping the inhabited world. That's all of them. Sleep well.